What happened when the undercover CEO stepped into his own luxury resort, only to find chaos, mistreatment, and a leadership failure hiding in plain sight? Nathan Caldwell thought his business was thriving. On paper, profits looked stable, but behind the scenes, guests were frustrated, employees were overworked, and managers were ignoring real problems. Determined to uncover the truth, he disguised himself as a low-level housekeeper and went undercover at one of his busiest resorts. What he discovered was worse than he imagined: a toxic work environment, a lazy manager playing favorites, and a hard-working employee being denied the opportunities she deserved. But Nathan wasn't just there to observe, he was there to take action. When an employee was falsely accused of theft, he revealed his identity in a shocking confrontation that changed everything. With bad management exposed and major firings underway, Nathan rebuilt his business from the ground up, proving that real leadership isn't about sitting in an office, it's about knowing what happens on the front lines. Stay tuned as we dive into this powerful story of justice, accountability, and what happens when an undercover CEO takes back control. Nathan Caldwell sat in his corner office, staring at the reports on his desk. His family's luxury resort chain had been a symbol of prestige and comfort for decades, a brand known for impeccable service and world-class hospitality. Yet, something felt wrong. The numbers looked decent, bookings were steady, and profits weren't plummeting, but beneath the surface, a troubling trend had emerged. Complaints had been rising steadily over the past year. Guests were dissatisfied with long wait times, unresponsive staff, and poor housekeeping standards. Online reviews, once glowing, now spoke of unprofessional employees, unclean rooms, and a lack of management presence. Worse still, employee turnover had reached an all-time high. Nathan had always been a hands-on leader when he first took over after his father's passing, personally visiting resorts, speaking with guests, and ensuring staff morale remained high. But as the company grew, he had become trapped in boardrooms, buried under financial forecasts and expansion plans, while the soul of his business slipped through his fingers. His regional manager, Martin, repeatedly assured him that things were fine, blaming lazy workers who didn't want to put in the effort for the decline in service. But Nathan wasn't convinced. If everything was under control, why were both guests and employees unhappy? Determined to uncover the truth, Nathan made a bold decision. He would go undercover. Donning a disguise, he would step into the shoes of an entry-level staff member at one of his busiest locations, Azure Coast Resort, a 5-star beachfront property known for its high-profile guests and stunning views. Ironically, it had also received the highest number of complaints. He needed to see firsthand whether the problem was lazy workers or something far more insidious. Early the next morning, Nathan ditched his tailored suits for a housekeeping uniform, swapped his luxury watch for a simple digital one, and changed his look with a beard, glasses, and a new name: Nick. He studied his reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the man staring back at him. It wasn't a perfect disguise, but it didn't have to be. Most resort staff had never met him in person. To them, he was just a face on a corporate memo. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and stepped out the door. For the first time in years, he wasn't entering his business as a CEO, he was walking in as one of them. What he was about to discover would change everything. Nathan stepped through the grand entrance of Azure Coast Resort, but this time he wasn't greeted with the warm smiles and VIP treatment he was accustomed to as CEO. Instead, he was just another new hire, a low-level housekeeper named Nick. The moment he entered the staff-only corridor, the shift in atmosphere was stark. The air was thick with exhaustion, employees rushing past him with tired eyes and hurried steps. No greetings, no casual conversation, just a team running on autopilot, barely keeping up with the relentless demands of the resort. His supervisor, Brad, a gruff, middle-aged man with a permanent scowl, barely glanced at him before handing him a worn-out cleaning cart with half-empty supplies. "You're on the 3rd floor. Don't waste time," Brad muttered, already turning away to bark at another worker. There was no introduction, no training, just an expectation to figure things out on his own. Nathan wheeled his cart down the hallway, already spotting overflowing trash bins, stained linens, and uncleaned rooms that should have been serviced hours ago. The sheer lack of organization was alarming. As he got to work, It didn't take long to see the deeper issues. Rooms were left unclean for hours because there weren't enough staff to handle the workload. Requests for extra towels or maintenance repairs piled up, ignored because no one had time. Housekeeping carts were poorly stocked, forcing workers to make multiple trips, further slowing them down. Despite this chaos, Nathan noticed one person moving swiftly and efficiently. Alina, a young housekeeper no older than 25, who seemed to be doing twice the work of everyone else. While others trudged through their shifts with quiet frustration, she moved with purpose, quickly making beds, refilling supplies, and even covering for others when they fell behind. At one point, Nathan overheard Elena pleading with Brad for extra hours, explaining that she needed more income to support her sick father. Brad barely looked up from his clipboard, sneering, "Not my problem. Be glad you even have a job." Nathan clenched his jaw, the first ember of anger sparking in his chest. This wasn't about lazy workers. This was a broken system. Employees weren't being supported. They were being set up to fail, then blamed for it. As Nathan scrubbed the floors and emptied trash bins, he watched everything unfold around him. The problem wasn't just inefficiency, it was neglect, poor leadership, and a culture that crushed hardworking people while rewarding indifference. He had seen enough. It was time to dig deeper. As the day went on, Nathan saw the full extent of the resort's dysfunction unfold before him. Every corner of Azure Coast Resort seemed to be held together by overworked employees, crumbling infrastructure, and a management team that refused to acknowledge reality. The issues weren't just minor inconveniences, they were deeply rooted in neglect. Rooms were double booked due to clerical errors, maintenance requests were ignored for days, and guests grew frustrated as their complaints fell on deaf ears. Employees like Elena ran themselves into the ground while others, particularly those favored by Brad, took extended breaks, leaving their teammates struggling. At one point, Nathan noticed a high-profile guest storming toward the front desk, visibly agitated. "I ordered extra towels and fresh sheets 2 hours ago, and your staff is ignoring me," she snapped at the receptionist, who looked pale with stress. Nathan knew for a fact that the request had been sent in. He had seen Elena rush to fulfill it despite her already overwhelming workload. Yet the guest was still waiting. Brad, as usual, was nowhere to be found. Instead of stepping in, the front desk staff scrambled to apologize, making excuses while the guest demanded a refund. Nathan's frustration deepened when he overheard 2 employees discussing how Brad played favorites with shifts, giving the best schedules to his friends while others were stuck with impossible workloads. Elena had tried to get extra hours, but Brad continued rewarding those who barely did their jobs while punishing the hardest workers. He also had a habit of ignoring customer issues until they escalated, then blaming housekeeping or front desk staff for mistakes that could have been prevented. The worst moment came when a guest reported missing jewelry from their suite. Instead of conducting a proper investigation, Brad immediately accused Elena, singling her out in front of the entire team. "You've been acting desperate for extra hours. Maybe you thought you'd help yourself to some extra cash too," he sneered, ignoring her horrified expression. Nathan watched as Elena's hands trembled, her face pale with shock. He had seen enough. This wasn't just mismanagement, it was cruelty. If Brad was willing to treat his best employees this way, how many others had suffered under his leadership? Nathan gritted his teeth, forcing himself to remain silent, just for now. He needed to handle this the right way. Brad thought he could abuse his power without consequences, but by the end of the day, he would realize just how wrong he was. Nathan had spent the entire day observing the toxic leadership, the blatant favoritism, and the way hardworking employees like Elena were mistreated, but when Brad publicly humiliated her over the missing jewelry, something inside him snapped. He had seen enough. It was time to step in. As Elena stood frozen, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger, Brad smirked, clearly enjoying the power he held over his staff. "You think I'm stupid?" he scoffed. "People like you are always looking for a way to make a quick buck." Nathan's voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." Brad turned, ready to bark at him like he had all day, but the second Nathan pulled off his fake glasses and beard, his expression shifted from irritation to horror. The staff, who had barely acknowledged Nick, the cleaner, all day, suddenly fell silent. "And Mr. Caldwell?" Brad stammered, his face draining of color. Nathan folded his arms, his gaze sharp. "We need to talk now." The air in the staff lounge was thick with tension as Nathan shut the door behind him and turned to face Brad. The manager tried to recover, his usual arrogance flickering back to life. "Sir, I didn't know it was you. If I had, I—" "That's the problem, Brad," Nathan interrupted, his voice cold. "You shouldn't have to know it's me to do your job properly." Brad shifted uncomfortably but attempted to defend himself. "Look, we're understaffed. I do what I can, but these workers—" "No," Nathan cut him off. "You don't do anything. I watched you all day. You ignored guest requests, mistreated staff, and let this resort fall apart while blaming everyone but yourself." He took a step closer, his presence towering over Brad. "And accusing one of my most dedicated employees of theft without proof? That's unacceptable." Brad let out a forced laugh. "So what? You're firing me?" Nathan's expression didn't waver. "You're done here. Effective immediately." For a moment, Brad looked like he wanted to argue, but the authority in Nathan's voice left no room for debate. He let out a bitter scoff, shaking his head. "Good luck running this place without me." Nathan didn't blink. "We'll manage." As Brad stormed out, Nathan exhaled, steadying himself before stepping back onto the resort floor. Now it was time to fix what Brad had broken. And the first step? Giving Elena the opportunity she had been unfairly denied. Nathan barely had a moment to process Brad's exit before the next challenge walked through the door. Martin, the regional manager. His stiff posture and tightly pressed lips made it clear he was already irritated. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, eyes scanning the gathered employees, all of whom were still reeling from the dramatic firing. Nathan didn't flinch. "I removed an incompetent manager," he said evenly. "One you should have dealt with a long time ago." Martin scoffed. "Firing Brad won't fix the resort's problems. You think you can just show up, wave your CEO badge, and suddenly everything runs smoothly?" He shook his head, exasperated. "Employees complain, guests complain. It's part of the business. But if you start making changes every time someone whines, you're going to have a real mess on your hands." Nathan narrowed his eyes. This was the attitude that had allowed the resort's culture to rot from within. A complete refusal to listen, an unwillingness to acknowledge problems until they were too big to ignore. It ended now. "You're right about one thing," Nathan said. "Firing Brad won't fix everything. That's why you're next." Martin froze. "Excuse me?" Nathan took a step forward. "You've ignored complaints, dismissed valid concerns, and allowed toxic leadership to flourish under your watch. I spent one day here and saw enough to realize the system is broken. Because you let it break." Martin let out a dry laugh, though it was clear he was rattled. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. Consider this your last day." Nathan's voice was steady, final. "Security will escort you off the property." As Martin stormed out, grumbling under his breath, Nathan turned back to the stunned employees. "This resort isn't failing because of you," he said, looking each of them in the eye. "It's failing because of bad leadership. That changes today." His gaze landed on Elena, who was still standing near the housekeeping carts, eyes wide with disbelief. "How many extra hours were you asking for?" She hesitated. "As many as I can get." Nathan nodded. "You're not getting extra hours. You're getting a promotion." A hush fell over the staff. Elena's lips parted, but no words came out. "You've already been leading this team," Nathan continued. "Now you'll have the authority to make real changes." For the first time since he met her, Elena's expression shifted from exhaustion to something else. Hope. And with that, Nathan knew this was only the beginning of the resort's transformation. A week after Brad and Martin's removal, Azure Coast Resort felt like a completely different place. The tension that had once weighed heavily over the staff had lifted, replaced with something the employees hadn't felt in a long time: motivation and trust. Schedules were adjusted to ensure fair work distribution, necessary supplies were always stocked, and most importantly, staff finally had a voice. Nathan made it a point to return frequently, not as a CEO locked in an office, but as a leader who listened. He walked the halls, checked in with employees, and made sure complaints were addressed before they could spiral into major problems. He even took the time to personally thank the housekeeping team, the backbone of the resort, ensuring they knew their work was seen and appreciated. Elena, now the head housekeeper, had wasted no time making improvements. She introduced a streamlined inventory system, implemented a more efficient room cleaning process, and even scheduled weekly staff meetings to hear feedback. The once overworked and underappreciated employees had begun to take pride in their work again. Nathan watched as they moved with purpose, no longer dragging their feet through endless shifts with no recognition. One afternoon, while walking through the lobby, Nathan overheard a familiar voice. A VIP guest who had complained about long wait times the previous week. He braced himself for more criticism, but was instead met with an unexpected compliment. "I don't know what changed, but the service here is incredible now," she told the front desk attendant. "It actually feels like a 5-star resort again." Nathan allowed himself a small smile. That was the real measure of success, not just profits or bookings, but the experience of every guest and the morale of every employee. His father's legacy had been tarnished, but now it was being restored. As he stepped outside, the sun casting a golden glow over the beachfront property, he pulled out his phone and made a note. Continue surprise visits, check in with staff, and never let the company slip back into dysfunction. Fixing the resort hadn't been about one big moment. It was about showing up, listening, and making real changes. And for the first time in years, Nathan wasn't just running a business, he was leading it. The story of Nathan Caldwell's undercover experience teaches a powerful lesson about leadership, accountability, and the value of frontline employees. It reveals that the true strength of any business lies not in corporate strategies or financial reports, but in the people who keep it running. Nathan assumed that declining service was caused by unmotivated employees, but in reality it stemmed from poor management, favoritism, and neglect. One of the key takeaways is that bad leadership can destroy a company from the inside. When managers prioritize personal convenience over fairness, hardworking employees suffer, and the entire system collapses. On the other hand, recognizing and empowering the right people can transform a toxic workplace into a thriving one. Another lesson is the importance of staying connected to the ground-level operations. CEOs and executives often become disconnected from the realities their employees face. Nathan's decision to work alongside his staff gave him insights that no report could provide. By listening, taking action, and holding people accountable, real change happens. Ultimately, the story reinforces the idea that true leadership isn't about power, it's about responsibility. Those in charge must serve, support, and uplift those who work for them.